this is the time where a lot of properties are having their leases turn over. And that means that you are up for renewal with your tenants in your property. Renewals give you a chance to determine if you want to increase the rent on the property, select a new tenant for the property, determine what the long term next step is for your property. Now, the biggest decision to make, if you have a tenant who's paying rent on time, taking good care of the property, you have a good relationship with them, is determining what price do you want the rent to be. Now, there is your desire for the rent, there is the reality for what you can get for the rent, and the legality of what you can enforce for the rent. What you desire needs to be in line with the market rate. If you want to collect $3,000 a month, but the market rate is $2,500, that gap will cause you to lose a tenant who will go to another property that is going to be of similar make, but for cheaper. You need to have some model in your head of what you are able to feasibly achieve, but you also need to understand what you can legally charge. California passed AB 1482, which went into effect in January 2020. If you're unaware, AB 1482, the rent cap just cause eviction addendum that you are required to have in your leases and required to disclose in any increases, states that if you have a property, it can be subject to a rent cap or the maximum amount that you can charge a tenant on a rent increase. This says that if you have a multi-unit property, now that is a property that has two rental units on the same legal parcel, legal ownership of land, they are subject to rent caps. Now, that does not mean that all dual unit properties are subject to a rent cap. The easy way to think about this is if you have a duplex or higher, a fourplex, an 8 unit, a 25 unit building, you can only raise rent 5% plus CPI for that month. CPI is a annualized basis of consumer price increases. So if you have, let's say, a 4 unit building and you're looking to raise the rent, you are allowed to go to a maximum of 5% plus CPI of 3% for 8% total. If you have a single family home, you have a condo, you have a townhome, you have a ADU in your backyard that you rent out, you are not subject to AB 1482. You can raise the rent whatever you desire. Now, there are two rules though. If you are raising someone's rent under 10%, you have to give them a 30-day notice. If you are raising the rent above 10% or 10% and above, you have to give them a 90-day notice. This is if they're month to month. If they're in a term lease, which has a set end date, you want to at a minimum give them 30 days, but at a desirable pace, give them 60 or more days in advance so they can make the best decision. Rent increases need to be done legally. You need to serve them a proper notice. It needs to be detailed what their new rent will be, and it needs to be allowable by the state law. Now, state law, AB 1482, can still be restricted by city law. Santa Monica, for example, has a egregious rent increase ordinance that is almost minimal to non-existent. Santa Ana has its own disclosures you have to include when you send out rent increases. Check your city laws, and these city laws can be found either on the city's websites or you can go to nolo.com and they have a rental protection list for what cities have rental protections that you need to adhere to. The most important thing to know with doing rent increases is be fair, but also understand what the cost is for a rent increase. Yes, you may be able to get $200 on an increase, but if your tenant is not willing to afford that and they want to move out of the property, $200 over a year is $2,400 in additional revenue and rent. But if your tenant leaves and that property is now vacant for a month, and let's say you have to pay to get it rehabilitated, upgraded, you have to pay for leasing, you have to pay for the work that's going to be required and the time that you are spending on this property, that could be worth more than $2,400. The cost of vacancy could be higher than that alone. So you have to weigh the pros and cons in these scenarios. And you have to make sure that you're doing the legal requirement to disclose the AB 1482 law to your tenants and adhere to its restrictions.